Hello my fellow Neonations and welcome back to the channel. On today's video, we're going to be going through the Construct 3 interface mostly in its entirety. I won't go through every single detail, but I'll try to cover the big things so that if you're a beginner, you can hopefully get a better understanding of how the software works. So if that sounds good to you, then let's get started. Okay, so when you first load up Construct 3, you're going to have a bunch of different options here, but the main thing we're going to do is we're going to make a new project by clicking on new, and then you'll have your ability to change the name. You can change the preset, which basically just gives you a bunch of different options for the layout of your game. You can change the viewport size, which is kind of like the aspect ratio of your game, and you can change whether the game can rotate the orientation like with a phone for landscape or portrait, and then you can choose to start with an event sheet. And then the last option here is to optimize for pixel art. Now, I would generally say, even if you are making a pixel art game, don't turn this setting on. For me personally, the settings that it changes when you turn the setting on don't really look good with the kinds of games that I'm trying to make, and you might find that it also won't work for your game as well. So I would suggest to leave it off, and then you can tweak the settings that you actually want to tweak later on when you actually get into the game. So with that said, let's just create a new project. And when you first load up, you should have a screen that looks kind of like this. On the right here, you're going to have a tab called Project, and then below that, you'll have a tab called Layers, and then on the left side, you'll have a tab called Properties. So let's go through this from left to right. Okay, so properties is basically a menu that is dynamic in that it depends on what you're currently selecting. So right now, if I click on this outside area, don't double click, just one click. You click on the outside area here and it's going to show you the properties for your layout. And so you'll need to go to this area from time to time and sort of change the different things that you need to change for your specific game. For example, if you want the game to have unbounded scrolling, which basically means it'll allow the camera to go beyond this sort of barrier right here. So that would be an example of something you might want to change in this menu. You have a couple of other things like being able to show the grid or snap to grid with your sprites and things like that. So that's an option as well. And something that's also worth noting is that pretty much everything in Construct has a description of what it does by clicking on it. So if I click on name here at the bottom, this section right here, it'll show me what name means, name of the selected layout. Or if I click on size, it'll tell me the size of the layout area in pixels, that sort of thing. And you can pretty much do that with most things that are clickable. So just keep that in mind if you're lost or if there's something that I don't cover in this video. You can always click on any of these words and you'll be able to get a definition of what they are. And it can be actually pretty useful certain times when the naming is kind of a little bit confusing. You can click on the name and you'll be able to figure out what it does. But with that said, on the right side here, we have the project menu, which basically is all of the folders of all the different aspects of your games, from your actual event sheets where your code is and where your sprites would go. And then below that, you have the layers menu. It's actually technically two menus because if you look here, you have your layers on the left. And if you click on this tab right here, it'll also show you your tile map. First, we'll just go through the layers. Your layers, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to be all of the different layers of your level. So when you have different layers in your game, so for example, if you have your foreground, your midground, and your background, they'll be organized on this tab right here. And then on the tile map tab, this is going to be where you set up your tile maps. And this will kind of load up dynamically depending on which tile map you have selected. So if you have multiple tile maps in your game, depending on which one you have selected, that's what will show up on this tab right here. So that's pretty much the main things right here. Now we're going to go into sort of the dynamic menus. So if we double click on an empty space right here, it'll load up this menu to create new object types. This is going to be basically a lot of the different main components of your game. So for everything from your sprites to your particle effects to your input methods like the gamepad to adding audio, all those sorts of things. So for example, to put gamepad support in your game, you would just add this in like that, double click it, and it will show up in your object types folder right here. And you can do that with everything. And if you want to create a sprite, we can do that right here. And that leads us into the next menu, which is the animations editor. And you know, this is really the area where you're going to be spending a large percentage of your game development time just making your sprites basically. And so on the bottom here, you have your different animation frames. I can right click and add a frame. And now we have 2 frames in the game. And we can also use this pencil tool to sort of build out our sprite like that. Obviously not a great sprite. And then we also have the pencil tool. We can erase that. And then there's also like these dynamic settings you can change depending on what tool you're using. You also have the selection tool. We can select all this and we can delete that. And then we have the line tool, which can help us make lines in the game. And there's a couple different settings that you can use for that. And then you have the square tool, which you can basically make a square. You can also decide whether it has a fill or borders or one or the other. And then you can also do the exact same thing with the circle tool. And then we can use the fill bucket tool to fill in an area. And one little quick tip here is let's just do a very simple thing like this. Okay, and then we're gonna select this color and we're gonna use the fill bucket tool. Now the current setting is on its default, which is to be set to flood fill, which will only fill the blank spot that you're currently clicked in, like that. So as you can see, it's sort of flooding to fill this empty space, but it's not filling anywhere else. Now we can do this over here as well, and we have these two spots that are colored. Now, if I change the color and I fill this in again, it'll only change this. But if we go back and we turn off flood fill and we flood fill this section, it will fill any color in the entire sprite that matches this color. As you can see here, see how it's filled both of the colors. So there you go, a nice little quick tip for when you're making your art. And then the last tool here in this section is the color picker tool, which pretty self-explanatory, picks whatever color you select. And then you have this other section right here, which does a couple different things. So if we select this one right here, this is called your image points. And to start off with, you're given one image point, which is called your origin point. And this basically sort of decides what the center of your sprite is. So currently it's literally the center of the whole shape. And so you can change this, you can make it so that it's the bottom. So for example, if you have your like spawn point, that spawn point can spawn your sprite and it will spawn the sprite from wherever the sprite's origin point is. So the origin point is actually pretty important. We can then add a couple of more image points. You can pretty much add as much as you want. I don't know how much it affects the performance of your game, but from what I've seen, it hasn't affected it too much. But yeah, you can add as many as you want pretty much. And basically each image point is just a part of the sprite that you're going to use in your event sheets to indicate where you want something to come out of. So for example, in the game that I'm working on, Neon John, my character can blast out of his arm. And so I have one of the image points set to his arm instead of the center of the sprite so that the projectile will come out of the arm rather than coming out of the center of the sprite. And then the last option here is your collision polygon. And this is basically what decides the shape of the physical aspect of your sprite. So there's the image of the sprite, which doesn't really have any sort of collision with anything. It's just a sprite. And then you have the actual collision polygon, which is the physical aspect. That's what decides what your character actually interacts with. So for example, when your character hits a barrier, it's not actually the sprite that's hitting the barrier, but the collision polygon. And you can change it to be whatever shape you really want. Although if you create too many points on your collision polygon, it might hurt your performance a little bit. So just keep that in mind. And then if we go over to the left, this is your color palette. This is basically where you're picking your colors from. And you can also save them by right clicking, and then you can save it as a primary color. You can also save it as a secondary color as well. And that's basically when you switch between these two right here. And yeah, that's basically what you do here. And then on the right side here, you have your animations. And then if you click on your animations, it'll show your animation properties like the speed of the animation and whether or not you want your animation to loop and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it for the animations editor. All right, so now that we have a sprite, let's click on it and we will go to the behavior menu, which is right over here. And this basically is the starting point of pretty much any game you're going to make. This is going to be where you kind of build your mechanics from. So for example, if you wanted to make a platformer, you can add the platform behavior like that. And then what we will do is we will go into the event sheet menu. And this is basically where we're going to program the game. So we will click add right here. We'll click add an event, and then we'll use the gamepad object that we added in earlier. And then we'll just do is button down, and then we'll select the D-pad right, and then we'll add an action, and then we'll click on the sprite, and then we will go on to simulate control, which is within the platform section of the sprite, and then we'll simulate moving right. And this would basically allow the character to move right if we had like a platform below them. And so basically, in the simplest terms, the way that Construct works when you're programming it is your left is going to be your condition. This is what is the triggering event of whatever is going to happen. And then on the right is what happens. And so it's as simple as that. That's really how Construct works. And so pretty much everything in Construct 3 is based on that concept. But with that said, that's pretty much it for today's video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe, and remember, follow the light.